of pages, Daniel. I'm trying to think of what to focus on. I guess one of the things that really struck me and which I really loved about the novel is the way you allow every character to be properly human and complexly human. Demirovich and the other parents in that section are burying their children as a result of a kind of horrific act of violence. But still you, or the narrator, attempts to understand what the motivation for that violence might be. There's a wonderful phrase where he uses something like the subterranean why. And it seems to me that this sense of trying to understand this thing that storytelling can do is also completely at odds with the way that we so often get stories these days, which is also captured in that passage, and that's via media, constant kind of online updates, constant kind of refresh, and just a kind of grasping, greedy kind of attempt to get as much kind of as much footage, as many clicks as possible. Was that a conscious decision to kind of fight against that way of absorbing information?
Yeah, definitely. You know, that it's a real kind of epistemological problem that I hate. That the kind of, I'm interested in the way that people come to formulate the judgments they formulate about other people, about any kind of situation. How do they gather the information that lends itself to a particular judgment? And one of the things, and I mean, that's something that I have been writing about for more than a decade now. And one of the things that's consistent across all the areas that I've looked into with this problem is that haste and expedience always lead to really bad stories. Really bad. And when I say stories, I mean like an explanation of cause and effect. Why did some person do this? Oh, it's because X, Y, Z. And the way that social media in particular, but well, no, I was, well, yes, social media today, but also social media from decades past. I'm thinking of things like talk radio, which has been around forever, but it's another form of social media, right? Like it's Twitter on air. The way that the haste and the experience comes out is sort of like, well, what, you know, why did somebody do something? Oh, it's because they are this type of person. This is the person that they are. It's not because of, you know, certain factors. It's because there's something innate to that person that made them do this thing. And the follow on from that for listeners or for readers or whatever is because they are that type of person and I am not that type of person, I am not capable of what they have just done. And I personally profoundly disagree with that, and I think the narrator clearly disagrees with that as well. And part of the conscious, like the thought process, like in making this a conscious thing, was that when people are reading literature, particularly literary fiction, they often tell themselves the opposite story about themselves, right? So we have this kind of assumption that literary fiction it's a humanist thing. It's a humanist discipline in the academy. It's in the humanities. We say it has a humanizing influence, and in saying that, we're going way back to a really, really ancient tradition. Like it was the Roman poet Terence who kind of formulated humanism, where with the idea that because I'm human, nothing human is alien to me. I can understand anything human. And so the way it plays out in literary fiction is often, you know, somebody tells their story, they tell it in detail. It's an experience very different from mine. It might be quite a harrowing experience, but that I have no connection to. But if they tell it in sufficient detail, I have the capacity to empathize with that and sympathize with that. And I can understand their story because nothing human is alien to me. It's all, I have that capability of understanding, which I think is true. But I also think that the opposite is true, which is if you're thinking of the very worst that people can do, that is also a human capacity. And I think that's in all of us, actually. I think that's that what separates any of us from anyone we might condemn because they're that sort of person is just luck. It's nothing innate. It's luck of genetics, it's luck of birth circumstance, it's luck of any number of factors of luck, but that is all it is. And that the very worst that we as a species are capable of is there in every single one of us. So yeah, the thought process was kind of, okay, if you go the hasty route and you condemn people for what they do because they're a different type of person, that's plainly wrong. But if you go the leisurely route and you say, you kind of say, well, sufficient understanding of certain types of people is within me, then that's only half the story. That's and because it's only half, it's a bit of a falsehood, or it's a bit of a lie for me. It's a bit of a self-delusion. So I wanted to kind of still work within humanism, but open up that second half of it, and that takes real leisure and space and whatever the opposite of haste is, a real, yeah, a real extending the principle of charity and goodwill to actually understand what it is that has led someone to do something, and to not, as the narrator puts it, to not ask why or who is this person, why did they do this, in a rhetorical sense, like just to answer the hasty narrative, but to really ask why, like, who is this, what have they gone through, why did this happen, and how far differently would I act if I had been in exactly the same circumstances. I don't think it's that far differently at all for most of us.
There's we'll come to another reading in a moment, but I just want to ask one more question before then. Is that okay? And for those of you who are listening, when Danielle and I were kind of working out how we do this, I said, I'll ask one big question at the beginning and then we can unpack things. And I realized when I was sitting down to get ready for this evening that in fact all my questions are big. And I think that that's because the book demands that of us too, that we properly interrogate what we're capable of, as well as what the characters who are represented here, their motivations and so on. So brace yourself for another big question. So while I was reading At the Edge of the Solid World, I found myself thinking quite a lot about W.G. Sebald. I'm not sure if he was a direct influence, and there are definitely important ways that I think this novel is quite different from his prose narratives, but there are also commonalities, including, I think, a consideration of the difficulties and the responsibilities associated with both representation and memorialisation. And I'm thinking especially, I suppose, of the Port Arthur chapter in terms of the kind of complications of memorialising an event. And in one of his essays, An Attempt at Restitution, Sebald poses the question, what is literature good for? And he says, or he writes, perhaps only to help us to remember and teach us to understand that some strange connections cannot be explained by a causal logic. And I'm wondering what you think literature is good for.
I think that first of all, that the Sebald essay, in particularly the line about restitution, is something that I've has stuck with me for a very long time, at least 10 years. I think it's a really powerful essay. It's the natural history of destruction, right? That appears in, I think, somewhere. So I would agree with that, but I would agree that that's part of what it's good for. But for me, there's a more primal question that's really different from anything that Sebald would say, maybe even totally at odds with anything that Sebald would say. And it's this. At bottom, I'm kind of an existentialist, right? I have a very limited lifespan. I don't know when I'm going to die. And so I have to think really, really carefully about how I'm going to use my time.
Yeah.
And I don't think that reading a work of literature for me that that the possibility of that sort of restitution is enough to earn it the time and attention it would take from me. I guess I'm kind of solipsistic and selfish in that way. That there's really only one thing. I mean, it's nice if I can get that from it, but that's not the reason to start and to continue. Nor is the reason to start and continue something like, reading a novel that says something about our times. Like, I hope my book does that, but I don't think that's enough reason for anyone really to pick it up and keep reading. I wouldn't wish that upon them. So for me, the only thing that has that force to propel me to give my time to it is the experience itself, is the aesthetic experience of reading. Like that's the for anything I read, really, unless I'm seeking to be informed about a particular issue, and then I'm really into nonfiction. But for fiction and literary essays, it is about aesthetics for me, and that means that I'm going to give it a quantity of my time, in this case, quite a large quantity of my time. And in the time that I'm giving it, it has to be taking me through a certain experience of sensibility. It can be, it can be anything. Like, what that experience is anything, but it has to be controlled and articulated over a length of pages that equals this block of time, so that I can look back on it that way. And I hope that was my first intention in writing the book. Yeah, that was the first thing and the ultimate thing. And then all the other stuff, the emotional journey and the commentary is important, I think, really important, but not primary. It comes in as a secondary thing or an ancillary thing to the aesthetic experience that I hope the book is giving the reader, as I hope